Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves against the Pistons on Saturday night. Anthony Edwards with a career-high 53 points, and the Wolves lose? Oh, yeah, we've reached that part of the season. We'll talk about why the sky just might be falling now. We'll also talk about WolvesClippers tonight. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers could bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Monday, everybody. It is a Timberwolves game day. The Wolves take on the Clippers tonight. But first, we have to address the debacle that was Saturday night in Detroit when Anthony Edwards scored 53. It was a career high. And if you weren't following the game, you saw the pushes from your NBA app or your ESPN app. You saw that Ant had a career high, was had 26 at halftime, whatever. You probably assumed, which would be reasonable, that the Wolves were playing great. They did not play great. They got beat by a very, albeit playing better, but mediocre Pistons team, missing Jaden Ivey on the second night of a back-to-back, handily on Saturday night. We'll talk about that first. We'll talk about, I'll do some studs and duds. We'll kind of breeze through some of the actual game stuff because this is just I guess, a symptom of an ongoing and larger problem for the Wolves, or I don't know. That may not be the right way to say it, but clearly there's some issues that have been going on for a while. And we talked about it on the show, but now, like, are things coming to a head now that we're back at a 500 record? Or is this like, hey, you flush it and you move on? I don't know. We let's talk about that. And we'll get into Wolves Clippers tonight too. It's been a little bit since we've seen LA. So that's all coming on the show. Big thank you off the top for making this show your first listen. Of course, you can listen anywhere. You can also watch on YouTube as well as the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, which you can find at both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a quick reminder about the new daily Locked On Wolves newsletter. You can subscribe at LockedOnDaily.com. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox Monday through Friday at LockedOnDaily.com. All right, so Wolves go into the Pistons game on Saturday night, having lost a couple games in a row. And like, the tone of this podcast last week was generally pretty positive because, look, the Wolves last week played the Thunder tough. They played the Celtics to the final possession and had a chance to tie on an Anthony Edwards 3 at the buzzer. If the Wolves win that game, even if they lose to Detroit, I bet these vibes are not quite so sour. Remember 1 week ago, we were talking about a 3-game winning streak, including a Christmas Day win over the Mavs, a nice win over the Rockets, and beating Wemby and the Spurs. 1 week ago, this was a lot more positive. And then they lose to 2 of the 3 best teams in the entire NBA in OKC and Boston. Perfectly defensible, reasonable losses. And again, the Celtics game easily could have been an overtime loss or an overtime win for that matter. And then they fall apart on Saturday. And here we are right back to where we were 2 weeks ago. After the Wolves had another, just prior to Christmas, the Wolves had another 3-game losing streak. That's the game we've been playing this season. Remember, there was the 4-game losing streak, back, actually it ended with the win over the Clippers, around Thanksgiving. Then there was the 3-game losing streak right before Christmas. And then there was a 3-game winning streak. And a week ago, everything's feeling okay. And now you got another 3-game losing streak. So I do want to preface all of what I'm about to say. I think this is a reasonable thing to point out. Well, the manner in which they lost the Pistons was bad, and I will address it, and it was bad. I'm not at all discounting that. And absolutely, the Wolves sitting at 500 right after New Year's Day is not at all where any of us thought they'd be, and I would certainly consider this year a disappointment to this point, no question about it. Remember, the Wolves went from mid-November, I'm going to pull the exact date here, until January 4th without playing a team below 500. November 21st was the last time they played a team that was below 500 when they played them. And at the time, they were 8-7. Coming into the Pistons game, they were a game above 500. So they played a really tough schedule to a 500 record, which is still not good enough. But I mean, look at the murderers row they played over the last couple of weeks, right? I mean, like, even if you want to take out the Lakers, fine. But you go Wemby, Knicks, There's 3 Warriors games in there, and then Atlanta was obviously a bad loss. And then Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, OKC, Boston. You finally get Detroit. Now you're at 500, but the schedule doesn't really lighten up. You get the Pelicans, who actually just won, but you get the Pelicans on a back-to-back on Tuesday night. And then you have this like resurgent shorthanded Orlando team. And then you get Memphis. New Orleans and Washington are mixed in there, but given the way they lost to Detroit, you don't actually feel that great looking ahead. So let's talk about the Pistons game. The Wolves lose this game by 14. They never looked ready to play. The defense was atrocious. They gave up 119 points to a Pistons team with no Jaden Ivey. They allowed Detroit to score 58 points in the paint. Minnesota only had 34. And the rebounding, I think, is you could just circle that category. That's all that it's not all that matters, but that is an indicator for how this game went. Minnesota was a minus 14 on the glass. They gave up 13 offensive rebounds to Detroit. And they gave up 58 points in the paint. The defense, period, on the perimeter in the paint was awful for Minnesota. And a couple of weeks ago, it was the only thing that was working. Minnesota was all the way up to like 4th in defense again. Now they're down to like 9th in defense league-wide. And the rebounding, it's not simply about our guys are bigger than you and, we're going to box you out. We're going to get a bunch of defensive rebounds. No, it's about effort. And there's obviously multiple parts to rebounding. There's technique. There's the fundamentals of boxing out, understanding where rebounds are likely to be, given the angles of the shots and all that stuff. And then there's also just playing hard. And that's what this was on Saturday. These dudes on the Timberwolves did not want to play basketball on Saturday night. They did not look like they wanted to play. We'll talk about the exception of Anthony Edwards, because I know the lazy narrative would be to look at the box score and say, oh, he had 53 and 2 assists. Man, it must have been a selfish 53. No, his teammates didn't want to be there. His teammates didn't want to play basketball on Saturday night. It just did not look like a team that like those rebounds, so many of those were 50-50 balls. And I talk about this all the time, and it's been one of the biggest issues for this team this season. And a little bit last year too, when they had stretches where they struggled defensive rebounding wise. It's not rebounding around the rim, and it's not even necessarily like long rebounds. It's not like back when Andrew Wiggins would leak out and not even bother to try rebounding, but going back several years now. I'm talking about the intermediate stuff, like the rebounds that are landing basically at the free throw line, 15 feet away from the basket, which become 50-50 balls. And nobody's prepping, unless there are some teams like you can scheme up. Our guys in the wing are going to, we're expecting these longer rebounds. We're more concerned with the defensive rebounds than we are about anything else, about getting out in transition and trying to scheme guys to the elbows for rebounds. That's a pretty rare thing to do in the NBA. Like, most teams are not doing that because you'd rather get the easy bucket in transition. And understandably, that's what the Wolves are trying to do. So then what happens is there's no one there. It's no man's land. It becomes a 50-50 ball. That rebound that's bouncing at the free throw line, extended across the floor, that is just a tip pass at midcourt. It is a loose ball. It's a 50-50 ball. And then it's all about effort. And I don't care who it is. Look up and down the roster and find me someone that gave that effort. Josh Bonnet was sick. He would have. Dante DiVincenzo did during the last homestand, but we didn't necessarily see that from him on Saturday. And I don't mean to single out Dante. I'm just saying last game, him and Minot were the ones that provided the energy back at Target Center. Minot was sick. He wasn't playing. Nobody provided the energy in this game. Ant was actually a little bit energetic defensively. And I mean, we've seen that before. When Ant gets going offensively, it feeds into his defense and the effort levels there. It not always the way not really ever the way it should work. But I'm not saying Ant played hard on Saturday. We'll talk about his game here in a minute. I thought he played great. The 2 assists kind of, I think, belies how well he actually passed the basketball in this game. I thought he was much more decisive. And I ripped on him last week about not being decisive enough. That being a primary issue, even though they were winning these games, and I guess they lost to OKC and Boston. But after I think it was the loss on Thursday to Boston, where I talked a lot about the lack of decisiveness from Ant and that being an issue. I thought he was decisive on Saturday. And that led to 53, a bunch of hockey assists and a bunch of would-be assists if the dudes around him could make shots. And I know the Wolves ended up 40% from 3, but don't just look at the team's shooting percentage or team's three-point percentage. Look at the fact that everybody not named Anthony Edwards was a combined 6 of 25 from outside the arc. That's like 23-ish%. It's under 25%. Nobody on the team, only one guy on the team made more than 5 shots that wasn't named Anthony Edwards. Julius was 6 of 12. Nobody else attempted more than 8 besides Randle. Nobody else made more than 5. Randle made 6. There were a bunch of guys that made 2 or 3 shots. Mike Conley didn't make a single shot. The Wolves only played 8 guys in this game with no Dillingham out injured, no Minot out sick. They played an 8-man rotation, and only one of those 8 guys looked like he wanted to be on the basketball court on Saturday night. We'll talk a little bit about Ant's game. I'll do a quick studs and duds, although it'll be a short one because you could basically rack everybody up under the duds category. And then I want to talk about WolvesClippers coming up here tonight. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Prizepicks. Basketball season is heating up now. Football's winding down. We're getting into the playoffs. There's no better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars than with Prizepicks. Whether you're a diehard fan or just love some friendly competition, Prizepicks makes it fun and easy to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. Here's how it works. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Think LeBron's going to drop 30. Maybe Luka's going to get more than 8. Think about the Timberwolves. Maybe Ant is going to back up his 53 and say, look, I'm putting the team on my back on Monday night. And he's going to get more than, whatever the number set at, whatever, he's going to get more than 27. Prizepicks lets you make your predictions and put your money where your mouth is in just 60 seconds. I've been using Prizepicks all season. Let me tell you, it's absolutely addictive. I mean, like, for instance, if you had taken Ant more than 27 points on Saturday night, you would have been looking pretty good. With Prizepicks flex play option, even if one of your picks doesn't hit, you can still double your money. Plus, once you hit, you can get your money fast, sometimes as quick as 15 minutes. It's honestly the best way to keep the game exciting. Now is the perfect time to join. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prizepicks. Run your game. All right, let's talk quickly about Ant's game. And oh, by the way, I should just put like a bow on the like more ambiguous, like effort based, I guess dramatic take from this game. I have on the graphic there on the side that I neglected to put up earlier in the show. It was a stomach turning loss because it was all effort based. And we talked about the lineup stuff, and I do this in between games all the time. We'll do it later this week, undoubtedly. I talked last week quite a bit about, hey, look, the starting lineup. The good lineup of the bench trio plus Josh Minot and Julius Randle as the 5th guy, that is the ticket to this team playing better. And you can play Ant as that 5th guy, fine, but like I think the bigger thing is it's the starting lineup as currently constructed is not working. I know Chris Finch said post game on Saturday that it's not a magic bullet. I don't think anyone thinks it is a magic bullet. I'm not saying you change the starting lineup, you're going to go back to your winning ways. The point is, the more minutes you play, a combination that clearly is not working, and we are nearly at the half. We're like 40+% of the way through the season. We'll be at the halfway mark in 2 weeks, games-wise, schedule-wise. Clearly, it's not working. And I'm not saying you can never play those 5 together. That's not possible. You have to. But maybe it's the first 6 minutes need to be somebody else to get this team off to a different combination to get this team off to a better start. Maybe it's and clearly in recent weeks, Chris Finch has adjusted the crunch time lineup. It wasn't simply we'll push the starter button. We'll do the auto subgroup like on 2K and put in the starters at the end of the game, like we start the game with. He's thankfully went away from that a couple weeks ago, and that's worked out pretty well. Whether it's Dante or usually Dante, occasionally Nikhil, in that closing lineup, sometimes Naz. But why does that same starting 5 have to start together? I understand that there's politics involved. I understand Julius is an NBA All-Star was an All-Star last season. He's the return for Cat. I get it. Whatever. But you're 17-17. Something's got to change. On Saturday, Anthony Edwards was the only bright spot, and it was a pretty decent 53 points. There were certainly some, he had 6 turnovers. I get it. But don't be concerned with the only 2 assists. Again, if you didn't watch the game, trust me, he should have had 5, 6, 7 assists if dudes just made open shots. He definitely had 5 or 6 hockey assists. He had one real early in the game where Nikhil hit an open 3, and then there were like 3 more that Nikhil just missed, like wide open attempts that Ant generated with his gravity, with his quick decision making. He dribbled into a couple because he was trying to force things, because why wouldn't you? When you're shooting the ball, I mean, he shot better than 50% from the field. So we could talk about like, hey, he shot the ball a ton. Yeah, he made more than half his shots. He was 10 of 15. 67% from outside the arc, and he was 11 of 12 at the line. The dude was shooting the ball really well, and he should have had more than 2 assists. Ant was not the reason for this loss, and I don't know that anybody would say he is, but it was not a bad 53. If you didn't watch the game and you just said, oh, he had 53, Julius had 17, no one else had more than 9, Ant must have just hogged the ball. Well, yeah, because nobody else could make a shot when he passed it to him. And not only that, nobody else was playing hard. And Ant didn't have a rebound. I don't think he had a rebound in the first half. He finished with 6. So, like, Ant is sometimes culpable for that stuff too. But after a game like this, you cannot blame Anthony Edwards. And I was blaming him last week for some of the issues in the OKC and Boston games, because when you play teams like that, when your role players play well enough, like a Dante or a Josh Minot or whatever, you need to get more from your star if you're going to beat other star players like an SGA or a Jason Tatum. And they didn't get that from Ant last week. But Ant showed up in this game. Nobody else came as well. It's like when he had 26 at halftime, they're just like, all right, well, Ant's going to carry us the rest of the way. That's not what happened. I mean, he tried. But to give up 119 points and 58 paint points and almost 49% shooting to the Pistons without Jaden Ivey, I know the Pistons are a 500-ish team. They've won 7 of 8 or whatever, but second night of a back-to-back, like, no excuse. You can't lose by 14 on the road to the Pistons like this. It's not good. And Ant, I thought, played well. I'm not going to sit here and blame Anthony Edwards for anything about this game. I should mention, I said this, I guess in the lockdown video I did Saturday night, but Cade Cunningham had 40 points on 29 shots, was awesome for the Pistons. The Wolves didn't really have a solution for him, which is goofy because, like, I mean, who else is going to score with no Jaden Ivey? Like, Beasley had 23 off the bench. Classic Malik Beasley revenge game. We saw that when he was with Utah. We saw it when he was with Minnesota against Denver. Like, shouldn't be surprising that Malik Beasley had a big game off the bench. I'm a little surprised we didn't get Wendell Moore Jr. revenge off the bench. He didn't play at all after he started on Friday night in the Pistons game. He didn't play at all against the Wolves on Saturday. But anyway, quickly, studs and duds. Ant's a stud. Julius Randle was okay, but he didn't really come to the party. I think he had a bucket in the first half. He had 2 at halftime. Not a stud. I mean, he was actually, if you want to play the plus-minus game, he was a -20. Julius Randle was. I don't think he played all that well in this game, despite he had 17, 7, and 6, and at least somebody else showed up at some point. Everyone else, I've never done this before. Everybody else is a dud in this game. Nobody played well. Rudy was especially bad. Rudy Gobert had a very bad game, 6.6 rebounds, which I know looks like it's similar to his box score from the other night, but he was actively worse than he was. I think it was the Boston game where he had a similar looking line, but I don't think he played that badly. He just failed to protect the paint badly on multiple occasions, bad spacing offensively, bad timing on trying to get lobs, and just not only 2 offensive rebounds in 30 minutes, just a bad Rudy game. He gets a dud in this one. I'm going to say Nikhil. I know Nikhil played hard, and Nikhil was one of the few guys that actually did look like he was playing hard, but he missed way too many open threes when the game was still in the balance. So he gets a dud in this game. And Mike Conley, just really bad for Conley. And the thing is, the Wolves can't not play Mike Conley. They don't have another point guard, especially now with Dillingham hurt. So Mike Conley is going to be in the rotation all season long, and he may only play 25 minutes a game, but he's not going anywhere. He's just got to play better. He can't shoot floaters anymore. He just can't do it. He tried one in this game and missed badly, missed 3 threes. Like, he still needs to be on the floor to run the offense and to hopefully knock down open threes. I do think he'll ultimately still shoot a little bit of a better percentage from deep. But the floater, clearly the wrist is bothering him enough that he just can't make floaters anymore. So I'd say Conley, Rudy, and Nikhil as duds in this game. In bigger picture, this is something we can cover later in the week. And I've said this, like, if I had to pick one thing besides the whole, like, trying to figure out the Randle fit, I would say Jaden McDaniels is the biggest. I don't mean to just, like, I'm going to do this, but I didn't intend to just, like, throw this in there as, like, a grenade and then walk away and not cover it the rest of the show. We'll talk about it later in the week, I promise. Jaden McDaniels is the biggest concern to me. I think he's been the most overrated Timberwolf for a while, and I'm not saying they shouldn't have extended him, because it's one of those, like, how do you not? It's like the Wiggins rookie. It's not the same, but it's similar to the Wiggins rookie extension where it's like, you remember the Glenn Taylor look him in the eye thing. You kind of got to do it with Jaden McDaniels, but now what? If you didn't develop him any further, if the other stuff, the offensive stuff hasn't clicked, if the effort isn't always there enough defensively, if the not getting into foul trouble thing hasn't clicked, which was an issue early in this game, where do you go from here with Jay McDaniels? To me, that's the biggest concern. I know they got to make a decision with Randle and Nas and Alexander Walker, But I would be most worried about the money committed to Jaden McDaniels and the lack of improvement that he's given you. And I'd even include last year. I know he was second team all defense, but offensively, he regressed, and he's gotten, I think, worse in a lot of ways this year. So that is a problem here moving forward. All right, let's talk about Wolves Clippers and peek ahead. We'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. The playoffs get started this Saturday. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. So NFL playoffs start this Saturday. And there's 3 games Saturday, there's 2 games Sunday, and there's 1 game Monday night. So plenty to look forward to football-wise. We want to talk about the Wolves. The Wolves are, of course, in action tonight at home against the Clippers, and they are 3-point favorites, which surprises me a little. We'll talk about this matchup next, but Kawhi is expected to play. He played for the first time on Saturday. The Wolves are 3-point favorites at home against the Clippers on Monday night. So, check that out. And then the Wolves play again Tuesday, by the way, their first back-to-back in a little while. So we'll talk about that line on tomorrow's show. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Wolves Clippers tonight from Target Center, as mentioned a moment ago on FanDuel. The Timberwolves are 3-point favorites at home against LA, which is a little bit surprising given the fact that Kawhi Leonard isn't on the injury report as of me recording this on Sunday evening. So Kawhi should play. He played for the first time all season on Saturday and had 12 points in limited minutes. He played, I think, like basically 20 minutes. What did he play? 19 minutes on Saturday, had 12 points, 3 of 5 from 3, shot 4 of 11 from the field. So Kawhi should play on Monday. There's nobody else in the injury report for the Clippers. This is a healthy Clippers team. They've been playing well here recently. They beat the Hawks on Saturday. Before that, they lost to the Thunder and Spurs. They're actually blown out by both the Thunder and the Spurs, big time by the Spurs. But prior to that, they'd won 5 out of 6. Yes, they beat the Pelicans and the Jazz in there, but they also beat Dallas. They split a pair with Dallas, and they beat Memphis, and they beat Golden State. The Clippers have played well here of late. The Wolves have already beaten them twice, and I've said before, I think it's a pretty good matchup for Minnesota, but it obviously becomes less exciting, less tantalizing when when Kawhi Leonard's back on the floor. The Wolves have already won the season series. They only play LA 3 times this year. They beat them by 1 back in November, at the end of November, and then they beat them December 4th, so just over a month ago, by 28. And that game was in LA. Yeah, it was in LA. The Wolves came in at 10-10. And LA was, of course, without Kawhi Leonard in that game. And the Wolves got out to a 33-14 lead very quickly. And it really wasn't a contest at all. And they had just beaten them a couple nights before. So the first game they beat them was November 29th, was the day after Thanksgiving. The second game was the following week, 2 games later for Minnesota. And again, they came in 10-10, they jumped out like an anomaly for this season, or at least a rarity for this season for the Wolves. They jumped out 33-14 by the end of the first quarter. Ant only had to play 26 minutes. He had 16 points, made 4 threes. Julius Randle also had 4 threes made and had 20 points in just 26 minutes. It was a big garbage time game for Minnesota. Josh Minott played 21 minutes. Nas played just 21 off the bench. Nikhil played 22 minutes. Like, nobody played more than 29 for the Wolves in this game. I mean, we saw heavy minutes for PJ Dozier and Daishen Nix. Neither of those guys are on the team anymore. So that was a 28-point win for Minnesota. The week prior, the Friday after Thanksgiving, the Wolves stopped a losing streak with that win against the Clippers. In fact, that was the one I referenced toward the beginning of the show. They had a 4-game losing streak with the Toronto, Boston, Houston, Sacramento losses, then kicked off a 4-game winning streak with a skin of their teeth 1-point win at home against the Clippers. That was NBA Cup too, by the way. That was NBA Cup play. The Wolves were up by 6 at halftime. Easily, like, they should have won, and the offense was pretty putrid in this game, but they were able to salvage it at the end and win by a point. James Harden had 20, took him 20 shots to do it, though, and he turned it over 4 times. And for the Wolves, and same deal, 21 points on 21 shots. Just not overall not a good offensive game. 21 turnovers for Minnesota in this one. And thankfully they shot almost 40% from three, and they got enough out of Conley and Ant. Conley had 13 points, was actually the Timberwolves' second leading scorer in that game, to win the game against the Clippers. I don't mind the matchup still. The Kawhi thing obviously complicates it. It's a lot more challenging to play when Kawhi's on the floor than when he's off. And for, I don't know how mobile he's going to be defensively, but adding the claw out there to a defense to play against the Wolves, whose offense has really been struggling. And I mean, the Clippers have been a top 5 defense anyway. Like, they're a top 5 defense right now. And Kawhi Leonard's played in exactly one game so far this season. They're actually, they're 4th on cleaning the glass in overall defensive efficiency. They're 1st in defensive rebounding. On the other side of the floor, a lot like the Wolves, the offense has really struggled. Like, their offense is actually worse than Minnesota's on the season. And adding Kawhi and turnovers are an even bigger problem for the Clippers than they are for Minnesota. So again, it's not an awful matchup for the Wolves. And I understand, I guess, why they're favored by 3 points at FanDuel. But given the vibes from Saturday that potentially could carry over from Saturday, coming back to Target Center for a 1-game homestand on Monday night, front end of a back-to-back. They travel to New Orleans on Tuesday to play the Pelicans. And, maybe that they're thinking like, hey, this is we can win in a blowout on Tuesday. Great. They got to take care of business at home against the Clippers. And again, overall, I like the matchup against the Clippers, even with Kawhi Leonard. I think that Minnesota could force enough turnovers on the defensive end of the floor to give themselves some cheap baskets in transition if they actually push the pace and run the ball like it's a football game, run the floor. The Clippers don't play at a very fast pace either. And I think the Wolves can take advantage of that and of the turnovers that the Clippers can cough up. The Clippers also defensively, when it comes to the Clippers themselves, they're not going to give second chance opportunities. They're also going to force a lot of turnovers. So that's the flip side of it, is like, this just could be an up and down game with two teams that don't normally play fast, but there could be so many turnovers and each team's trying to not go against the other team's set half court defense that you may see a bit of pace pushing, a bit of sloppy play, maybe an uptick in fouls. The Wolves have been fouling a little bit more recently. Both teams are kind of middle of the pack in regard to fouls on both ends of the floor. So pretty interesting matchup, especially with the return of Kawhi Leonard. And also given that it's the front half of a back-to-back for Minnesota, they haven't played a back-to-back in quite some time. In fact, I think the last back-to-back they had was like before Thanksgiving, if I'm not mistaken. The last back-to-back they had was the Tuesday, Wednesday leading into Thanksgiving, and they lost both ends of it. The overtime loss to Houston, and then the loss to Sacramento, which I think was an NBA Cup game, just the day before Thanksgiving. So, we'll see how the Wolves handle the back-to-back portion of it, and also all of the clamoring for lineup changes. At the moment, Josh Minnett's questionable as I record this, so hopefully he's able to play Monday night because I think he could make a difference for the Wolves. Again, they play the Pelicans Tuesday night, so we'll do the post-game pod on this show, on this feed Tuesday, and then I'll just briefly talk Pelicans at the end of that one. They've obviously been terrible. They've been, they won the other night, but a very winnable game. A shorthanded Orlando team that's still playing great, basically the opposite of a healthy and playing terrible and playing well below expectations Wolves team. They play them on Thursday, and then the next game would be Saturday against the Grizzlies. So a couple of tough ones coming up with Orlando, obviously the Clippers, and then Memphis, and then you get the Pelicans Tuesday, and then next Monday it's Washington. So a couple of really easy ones and a couple of really tough ones. I should say should be really easy ones in air quotes. For the Wolves, but we'll see how it all turns out. Of course, the live postcast will be at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube tonight, following the game with Jack Borman and Luke Gidman, and then I'll be back on Tuesday with the post-game pod. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder to subscribe to the newsletter at lockedondaily.com. It'll be in your inbox every day, Monday through Friday. All things Wolves and some bigger picture NBA stuff too to your inbox Monday through Friday. Again, subscribe at lockedondaily.com. The Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.